Good morning and welcome to Fontaine Fifth Wheel Tech Talk. Today we want to quickly go over, since Old Man Winter has left us, of what we need to be looking at on our fifth wheels. Being that the fifth wheel is one of the main components of the truck to keep this trailer attached to the fifth wheel, there are certain things after wintertime that you need to make sure that you perform. And we've got this fifth wheel turned over so you can see the components that I'm referring to. You want to make sure that you go underneath the truck and that you actually check the springs with a flashlight. You have 1, 2, 3 springs and make sure that those springs are all attached. One, you got the secondary lock spring, what we call the bumper spring, and the timer spring. Very important. Those springs need to be attached for the fifth wheel to operate properly. You also want to check your pull handle for straightness. If your pull handle has a bend in it, do not try to straighten the pull handle. You need to replace it. If you get a bend in the handle, you try to straighten it, you take a 1/2 inch out of it, it gets bent again, you take another 1/2 inch out of it, then your secondary lock is going to be pulled away from the side of the fifth wheel. You have 2 locks in the fifth wheel, your primary and your secondary. If the fifth wheel is fully closed, the handle's within 1 inch of the skirt of the fifth wheel, the fifth wheel cannot open, if you'll notice, without pulling the pull handle. It hits the stop. The only way to open this fifth wheel to clear the secondary lock is to pull the pull handle to rotate the cam around the stop. So you also want to check your operating handle to make sure your operating handle is straight, and you want to check this nut on your adjustment rod. Those are the main components underneath the fifth wheel that you need to make sure that you're looking at. While you are looking at these, it will also be a good idea to lubricate these pivot points. The pivot point on your secondary lock, the pivot point on your bumper, and the pivot point on your operating handle. You can lubricate that with whatever lubrication you prefer. We like a spray lubricant of some type. It is important to make sure that these are lubricated in order for the fifth wheel to operate properly and for the long lasting of the bushings that are inside here. So make sure that you're looking at all this. There is one area of the fifth wheel that you need to pay very much close attention to, and that is going to be the area by the operating handle. This is your operating handle that goes all the way up and down. In this particular area here, if the kingpin has struck this area and crushed in the side of the fifth wheel, it can keep the fifth wheel from operating. So you need to make sure that you look at that. If you have a fifth wheel that is not wanting to open all the way, and it gets to a certain point to where it's about this much out and the fifth wheel won't open any further, on the 6000 series fifth wheel, there is a block here that you need to look at to make sure that the kingpin has not set on top of the fifth wheel and pushed this area in. It takes an enormous amount of pressure to do that and repeated hits in order for that to happen. So we're going to flip the fifth wheel over now, and we're going to show you how to properly lubricate the fifth wheel. So your fifth wheel is going to be in the open position when you're checking all this stuff. The main thing that you need to do is you need to clean this as good as you can and get all the grease off of it so you can inspect the top surface of the fifth wheel and the sides for cracks. It's very important that you check for cracks and stress during your PM. These areas, these indentions, they are in here for a reason. Those are a grease holder. When you clean this up, and if you clean it up properly and get all the grease out of here, you want to apply grease about 1 inch above or 1/2 inch above in these areas. And then you want to take a scraper or a piece of cardboard and you want to spread that halfway up the ramp and evenly over this area. You can lightly lubricate the center of the fifth wheel. This is a void area, and it's a void area to keep a convex trailer plate from center loading the wheel and causing the wheel to flex. You can lightly lubricate this. It's not going to hurt. If you're seeing wear in this area, you should not be seeing wear in the center portion. This portion, as I said, is below the performance of the fifth wheel. If you're seeing wear in this area, you've definitely got a bad trailer plate. That can cause a couple of things. It can cause the kingpin to protrude too far down through into the fifth wheel throat, not make contact with the trigger to trigger the fifth wheel closed, and it can also cause the upper collar of the kingpin to hang up on the locks. So we're going to trip the fifth wheel closed. To do that, you just need to take a pry bar and punch the bumper to trip the fifth wheel. You always want to check your serrations to make sure in your locks that they are good during your PM. So you pull out on the handle a small amount, you take another screwdriver and pull along to see if you can feel or hear those teeth are still there. At that point, while you've got it open, you want to apply a small amount of grease, not 90 weight gear oil during the summer. It is very important for the longevity and the operation of this wheel that you are applying grease between the locks, along the back side of the wedge, in the cut of the jaw, and on the stationary jaw. Do not pile tremendous amount of grease on top of this. Small amounts go a long way. After you do that, you want to not fully open the fifth wheel, but you want to move it back and forth to distribute the grease that you just inserted into those locks. The reason I told you to grease the backup of this wedge, there's a backup pad that runs all the way across. During the wintertime, these locks have a tendency to get rusted. When you put 90 weight gear oil or diesel fuel on this, after you've run it for, say, 3 or 4 weeks, most of that's gone. And I know now that the trucks are not coming back in for greasing except during PMs, and that's probably every 30 to 50 and even longer, 1,000 miles. So it's very important when summertime gets here that you lubricate these locks for the longevity of the locks and the proper operation of the fifth wheel. So keep in mind that it is very, very important that you inspect this wheel before you apply grease. And I'm stressing that to you to keep you from having a truck that's sitting on the side of the road. So now you want to open the fifth wheel after you've lubricated it. You want to take your kingpin tool. You want to insert it into the throat. Close the fifth wheel. Make sure that your handle is within 1 inch of the side of the skirt of the fifth wheel. Make sure the fifth wheel is fully closed. You want to check your adjustment rod over here on this side. Push it in and out with your thumb about 1/4 of an inch. You do not have to measure that with a tape measure, somewhere close to 1/4 of an inch. What that will allow to happen is if you get a worn kingpin, it will let the wedge jump across one more step, pushing the jaw, the movable jaw, closer to the kingpin. So it will take up slack. So now you've made this adjustment, and let's say that you couldn't move it, and you turned it counterclockwise to be able to get that. You have to open the fifth wheel and reclose it to let the wedge set another step further, pushing the jaw closer. Then you want to check it again. You want to repeat that until the adjustment stays at 1/4 of an inch. Okay? So let's move over here to our bracket. It's also important that you're checking your bracket too. You want to make sure that all of your bolts are on the outboard angles, that all the bolts are there. There's none missing. DOT will put you on the side of the road if all these bolts are not in. You also want to check your springs and your cylinder and your linkage to make sure they're not bent or damaged. Always actuate your cylinder to make sure that it's operable. If you have a bracket, which all LWBs, NWBs have this liner on it, you want to take a screwdriver, you want to pop that liner off, and you want to check at the most center portion of the liner to make sure that you have at least 1/8 measurement. If you don't, you need to replace these. You also want to check your bushings to make sure that they're still intact. You can have as much as a 1/2 inch movement if the fifth wheel were setting on top of this bracket and you were to go to the side and lift that up with a crowbar. You can have as much as a 1/2 inch up and down movement. The reason for that is our hole is elongated, so when the truck goes into a turn, it allows the fifth wheel to pick up a small amount, which relieves weight off and stress off of the lower assembly. The fifth wheel is designed that way. Our competitors have a solid bushing in here, and they have a solid hole, so ours is different. I want to make sure you understand that. You want to also make sure that when you check your cylinder and it's in the open position, you want to apply a spray lubricant inside the pockets on both sides. There again, you can use whatever spray lubricant. I would not use a rust inhibitor. The reason for that is it's not going to stay on. It's not going to stay on as long as a white lubricant or a silicone lubricant or something of that nature. You also want to spray a small amount inside the track. If you have a lot of dirt build up on your slide rail, you want to try to just take a rag and quickly clean that off. Make sure that you're checking your linkage. If this linkage gets bent, if it gets bent down, then it's not going to operate properly and your slide locks are not going to insert all the way in to your slide rail. That is basically what we have for our spring maintenance. If you have any questions, send the questions to parts@fifthwheel.com. Thank you, and we appreciate you all visiting our Tech Talk. Thank you.